Mr. President, we wish at the outset to voice our disagreement in principle with the approach of the presidency with the invitation extended to today's meeting of delegations under Rules 37 and 39. A whole 7 of them are here, and they are all members of NATO and the EU. We have already repeatedly stated that the invitations to such a number of participants, the majority of whom are guided by a block-based discipline, provide no added value with rare exception. There is a negative trend where European countries, when they preside over the Security Council, they bring in the number of participants to participate in these meetings in Ukraine, and in one chorus, these participants voice talking points which are identical and voiced by the presidency of the EU. This all drags out the meeting, and the discussions during the Security Council lose any operational nature and value. We categorically object to transforming Security Council meetings into a lecture hall where a select number of countries lecture others with sermons that are completely unoriginal. We doubt that the representative of Germany today, for example, will provide a clarification about the recent statement of his foreign policy mission about Germany having a negative assessment of the Easter truce in Ukraine and the skeptical approach vis-a-vis the truce to commemorate the 80th anniversary of the victory in the Great Patriotic War. Prospects for peace between Ukraine and the Russian Federation are of no concern to those in the EU. Today's meeting was requested by a number of the most stubborn European sponsors of the Kiev regime. This is a reflection of their fear of being sidelined in the context of the new U.S. administration as it seeks to arrive at a long-term solution to the Ukrainian crisis. Hence, the desire to thwart this process and to restore for Ukraine Zelensky's image of a victim which has been tarnished in recent months in the light of the new facts that have surfaced. This apparently is designed to foster what the Ukrainian representative has on a virtually daily basis circulated, namely the correspondence with a description of Russian alleged strikes targeting civilian objects. However, this kind of a practice of whipping up emotions, in fact, does not benefit Ukraine. It plays against Ukraine time and time again with showing the blatant fakes, as was the case with the death of civilians in Kryvyi Rog and Sumak on 14 and 13 April, which became, as was incontrovertibly demonstrated, that this was a consequence of the Kiev regime's egregious violation of the norms of international humanitarian law. We are deeply disappointed at the fact that the UN Secretariat, through Madame De Carlo, not only actively plays into these fakes, but quotes the premises and the talking points of the Biden administration, which the past Biden administration, thereby the Secretariat is taking the side of the party of war, grossly violating what is stipulated in Article 100 of the UN Charter, the obligation to remain impartial and objective. This approach undermines trust, not just in the statements of the Secretariat about the Ukrainian crisis, but also the allegation of its leadership about playing a constructive role towards a peaceful settlement. We further stress the fact that the Russian armed forces are carrying out strikes exclusively targeting objects that are related to the military capabilities of Ukraine. Civilian casualties occur due to the deliberate deployment of Ukrainian air defense systems in heavily populated areas and incompetent operations thereof, as well as due to the fact that Ukraine is using its own civilians as human shields. The special operation is ongoing, and the strikes on 18 April, which was the formal pretext for convening today's meeting, were carried out by high-precision weaponry targeting key production points for the launch of UAVs, as well as infrastructure for Ukraine's military airfields. All of these objectives have been achieved, and Kiev is perfectly aware of that. We, by maintaining, see such hypocritical, mendacious allegations. The Kiev clique is trying to portray this as a truth, and the European puppeteers of the Zelensky regime, in supporting this, completely unmask their true identities. And yet again, they are showing their selective blindness and their blatant double standards. In London, Paris, and Brussels, and their henchmen, since August last year, they did not manage to utter a word of condemnation in the barbaric attack by the Zelensky cabal, targeting cities, towns, and villages nearing the border in Kursk Oblast. This territory was completely cleansed of the Ukrainian invaders last week. We repeatedly shared blood-curdling information and data about the atrocities perpetrated by the Ukrainian executioners, targeting the civilians in this Russian region, including murder, mass executions, rape, torture, abductions, and rampant plunder. We held an informal meeting of the Security Council with an invitation extended to witnesses of these events. The most recent was the Banderite attack on 24 April, targeting a masterpiece of ancient architecture that is the New Jerusalem Temple in Belgorod Oblast, which resulted in its destruction. This was an operating church, and there were no military targets anywhere near that area. Nevertheless, the UAS shelled this holy site, which resulted in a blaze, and subsequently they targeted the firefighters who were attempting to extinguish that blaze. From the 21st to the 27th of April alone, UAF strikes targeted and claimed 98 civilian casualties. 12 people, including a child, died. Another 86 people, including 4 minors, were wounded. Civilians were targeted with approximately 2,000 munitions, including with multiple launch rocket systems, as well as they were targeted by mines, grenades, artillery shells, including cluster munitions. Unarmed civilians were targeted by combat UAVs, as well as small arms. The lion's share of the weapons used for attacking civilians were manufactured in the West. However, Kiev's European sponsors are scrupulously avoiding any mention of the inconvenient for them topic of the Kursk misadventure, carried out by the Kiev Princeling, which resulted in the complete rout of the UAF, dealing a fatal blow to the military capabilities and morale of the Ukrainian army. There was most active participation in the liberation of Russian territory, and this was the contribution was provided by the DPRK units. At the same time, Moscow and Pyongyang are operating fully in accordance with international law, specifically Article 4 of the Agreement on the Comprehensive Strategic Partnership, dating 19 June 2024, which provides for immediate delivery of military assistance in the event of an armed attack on any of the parties. We are deeply grateful to our Korean brethren whose fortitude and courage will remain forever etched in the memory of our people. Mr. President, under these circumstances, the main goal of Kiev's European accomplices has been contrary to the facts, contrary to common sense, to highlight the head of the Kiev clique's alleged aspiration towards peace, who, according to your baseless allegations, which Russia does not embrace, according to your baseless allegations, today we have heard a number of such attempts voiced by Western colleagues. London, Paris, and Brussels are finding it increasingly difficult to do this because camouflaging the increasingly striking, brutal, misanthropic and Nazi essence of the Zelensky regime is becoming increasingly difficult. The Russian Federation has been prioritizing diplomacy and peaceful scenarios for conflict resolution. We have demonstrated this time and time again. Despite Kiev's sabotage of the 30-day moratorium on reciprocal strikes targeting energy infrastructure objects, which the UAF violated more than 130 times, the Russian Federation undertook an act of goodwill, announcing an Easter truce from 1800 hours on 19 April to 00 hours on 21 April. This allowed this could have allowed the Ukrainian side, not in word but in deed, to demonstrate its good faith in terms of compliance with ability and willingness to assume to shoulder its obligations and willingness towards peace. Having hastily rejected this initiative, apparently Zelensky, who was under pressure of sponsors and concerns for his image, he quickly changed his view and supported the proposal. The intensity of hostilities along the front line was indeed reduced during this time, but the Russian Defense Ministry has reported 4,900 violations by the Ukrainian armed forces. Specifically, the Ukrainian armed forces continued to carry out artillery strikes and strikes with the use of UAVs, not just targeting our troops, but also targeting civilian objects in adjacent regions of Belgorod, Bryansk, Kursk Oblast, and Crimea. The Russian Federation stringently complied with the ceasefire regime and remained at the previously held boundaries and positions. In this way, Zelensky once again eloquently demonstrated his inability to negotiate in good faith, his desire to torpedo any peace processes. He's cognizant of the Kiev regime is cognizant of its imminent defeat and is increasingly slipping into openly terroristic methods. On the 25th of April, Donald Trump's special envoy Steve Witkoff was traveling for a new round of negotiations with President Putin. And at that point, the deputy chief of the main operations directorate of the General Staff of the Russian Armed Forces, Yaroslav Moskalik, was murdered. The suspect, Ignat Kuzin, confessed, and he announced that he was recruited by the Ukrainian security services in exchange for monetary remuneration. In September last year, supervisors set out an assignment for him to eliminate Mr. Moskal, and he undertook to carry out that assignment. Yesterday, Ukraine's leadership officially confirmed and acknowledged its complicity in this crime, in this murder. And the secretary of the Rada Committee on Security, Roman Kostenko, commenting on this, announced that such methods will remain within the toolbox of the Ukrainian security services even after the end of the war. And I quote, in the next 10, 20, 30 years, however long is necessary. This further demonstrates the criminal, perfidious nature of the Kiev regime, whose head is purely concerned with saving his own skin and concerned with covering up the crimes that he committed against his own people. And this is why, contrary to the aspirations of the Ukrainian people, he is bent on escalating the conflict and is recklessly rejecting the United States' balanced peace proposals. Nevertheless, the Russian-U.S. dialogue is ongoing. There will be discussions of a number of nuances for the future contours of the peace plan. From the very start of the conflict, we announced that we prefer diplomatic methods for the attainment of the goals of our special military operation. And this is why Russia remains focused on achieving a sustained long-term solution that would eradicate the root causes of the conflict and to prevent the conflict from recurring. As another step towards peace, President Putin announced a truce starting at 0000 hours from the 7th to the 8th of May to 0000 hours from the 10th to the 11th of May. We hope that the Ukrainian side will follow this example. Such a step could be the prelude to direct peace talks between the Russian Federation and Ukraine without any preconditions whatsoever. And we are willing to engage in this despite existing difficulties regarding the legitimacy of the head of the Kiev regime. Mr. President, our country's principled approaches towards settling the Ukrainian crisis were voiced by Russian President in June 2024. Let us recall this includes Ukraine's respect for the rights of the Russian language population, the neutral, non-aligned, nuclear-free status of the country, its demilitarization and denazification, recognition of the status of Crimea, Sevastopol, the Donetsk and Lugansk People's Republics, Kherson, Zaporozhye Oblast, in accordance with the will expressed by their residents as constituent territories of the Russian Federation. This position is firmly rooted in the provisions of the Charter of the United Nations and is not subject to revision. It is important that those who genuinely wish to arrive at a long-term solution to this crisis provoked by the West, that they take this into account We expect not empty declarations from them, not calls for truce, which our European colleagues are so vociferously proclaiming, just because they understand that Ukraine will suffer a complete, resounding defeat. We expect of them concrete, clear signals towards a peaceful resolution. This, first and foremost, applies to an end to weapons deliveries to Ukraine and the willingness to persuade Zelensky of the urgent need to engage in constructive dialogue. And to that end, let us recall there's a need for him, inter alia, to repeal what has been enshrined in legislation at his urging, that is the prohibition against direct negotiations with the leadership of the Russian Federation. And more broadly speaking, to finally honor the pledge made to Ukrainian voters back in 2019 to move towards peace with the Russian Federation, to respect the rights of the Russian language population of that country, and on the whole, to act for the benefit of the Ukrainian people, not for the benefit of those seeking to manipulate Ukraine purely as a pawn in the geopolitical struggle being waged against Russia. When Kyiv and its European sponsors recognize this and understand the futility of the very idea of prolonging and pursuing hostilities, when they realize that the alternative to this is a resounding defeat and capitulation of Ukraine, then probably we will begin to move in the right direction. Thank you.